Hey guys, what's happening? So with us continuing our coverage on the Ultimates, it's here where we take a look at how things have shifted after the loss of Tony Stark, with each one of these guys kind of handling it in their own way, where in the case of Doom, it looks like he hasn't given up on Tony in the slightest, and that could make for some very interesting outcomes in the not so distant future. So with that said, if you're enjoying these videos, be sure to drop a like, subscribe if you're new to the channel, and don't forget to hit that bell up top to get all notifications. Alright, so coming back, first we pick up with Steve Rogers, Captain America, and Jim Hammond, the original Human Torch. And right away, when we see Steve with this newspaper from the Daily Bugle that says, "Who are the Ultimates? 1 year after the Stark Tower attack, what do they want? And why do they hate us?" On one hand, it's a bit of a reminder of how the narrative's being pushed to place the public against them, which has been a big deal for the Ultimates lately. But in the here and now, Jim Hammond's more focused on how did Steve get a physical newspaper, since most people in today's age get their news off the internet. And I like how we get a moment here where Steve tells Jim, more or less like, "Come on man, don't do that. You're as old as I am." Because he's calling him out for carrying around an actual newspaper. So Jim goes on to tell Steve how he's been rebuilt, like he's with the modern times inside and out, which I imagine happened not long after they pulled Jim from that damage control facility. But this confirms that he's been updated and remade for a new age. And it's not like this is something that we spend a lot of time focusing on here, and I mean it's really more or less brushed over. But I gotta say, I really like that that's a thing. And I mean, it also explains his more modern look as well. But right now, is Steve taking Jim to this place that him and Bucky used to go to back in high school by just walking around and looking for it? For a moment, this just kind of has Jim like, well, you know they got maps on phones now. Only for Steve to be like, I don't need a map or a phone. I just need to get my bearings. But you can tell it's more the case of Steve wanting to do things the older way that he's used to, as opposed to adapting to the new world. So Jim tells him that he better find those bearings fast, because everyone's looking to Steve for leadership, especially with Tony being gone. So Steve tells Jim that he knows, just before they find the place he was looking for, which was McCorley's old alehouse. Which in a way, with Steve finding this place his way, the old-fashioned way, it almost feels like a bit of subtle foreshadowing. That's letting us know that Steve's gonna handle things the old-fashioned way, practically across the board. And while they're here, Steve's reminiscing about sneaking in here as a teenager with Bucky back in the day when they were in high school. And it's funny how he's like, "Oh yeah, I almost got beat to death in that corner, fighting some guys from the American Nazi Party. I was 16 and stone sober when I threw my first punch." And it's kind of like, oh man, that sounds like a Kodak moment. But even with Steve and Jim coming here for a drink, I can't go without saying that this reminds me of how, back when Steve, Tony, and Doom broke Jim out of that damage control facility, Steve had what appeared to be a bottle of gin tucked behind his shield. And at the time when Tony saw it, he's like, what you finna do with that? And Steve was like, "I'm gonna drink it with an old friend." And he even told Tony that he was welcome to join. But of course, Tony was like, I don't drink. But like we saw when we talked about this before, once they got inside and they found Jim's body, this is when we discovered it was Steve's plan this whole time to bust out the Molotov cocktail and reignite Jim so he could join the fight. So yeah, it's just kind of funny to me that they're actually going to get drinks now. I think it's a nice touch. But while Steve's here talking about how things used to be, Jim tells him like, hey, you and I both know where things are going. Because he tells Steve here, a war is coming, a fire will grow. We've been through this before. But the others, you saw how shaken they were after Tony. They're not used to losing people. They aren't ready for it. So Steve tells Jim, then we'll have to get them ready. And I mean, it's one of those things where it's like neither one of them wanted to be this way. But again, this is taking us into how everyone's thinking now that Tony's gone. In the way that Steve sees it, Tony wasn't the first casualty and he's probably not going to be the last. Which is why for Steve, as a soldier, he's just like, well, these guys had better get used to it. But by no means does this come up like it's coming from a cold or heartless place, but instead it's more like Steve just wants those who are willing to fight to be ready for the cost that comes with war. And while they're here, they also see the live broadcast of the 1-year anniversary memorial service remembering the people who were lost in the Stark Tower attack. So when the drinks come, at first Steve's like gonna cheers to new beginnings, but when they hear Father Murdoch talking about the thousands who were lost and the hundreds of thousands who are mourning, Jim's like, how about to all the ones who don't get saved? And Steve goes on to add Tony to that, since he brought the Ultimates together. And for a moment here, Jim's like, well, you know, a part of me thought we should be there. But Steve's like, no, the kind of security they've got, you'd have to be some kind of fool to go in person. which from here takes us right over to the memorial service where we find Hank and Janet, who have actually decided to show up in person. And if anyone's the fool here, I guess it's Hank, since it was his idea for the two of them to go. And I mean, in a way, you could kind of say it's the both of them, since they showed up here without their suits. And I mean, I get it, because you don't want to just pop up here as Giant Man and Wasp. But with how crazy things have been lately, I wouldn't leave home without my suit. I'm just saying. But while they're here, Hank quickly starts to have second thoughts when he sees the reaction to the crowd after Father Murdoch tells them to commit themselves to love and forgiveness, which right away has Hank like, man, they really hate us. But Janet reminds him that what happened here, it wasn't about them, or it wasn't their fault. But Hank's just like, it was a little about us. And for Hank, there's more to it than just a Stark Tower attack, because to him, he thought it would be good for them to come after what happened to Tony and after Janet almost died as well. And Hank knows, even though Janet's acting like she's fine and everything's okay, she's really not. Because everything they've seen and they've been through this past year, and even the things they've done, it's cost people their lives either directly or indirectly. So he tells her, don't pretend it doesn't bother you. I know you're not sleeping. I know you're not sleeping because I'm not sleeping. How long do you think we can keep going like this? And I want to reiterate here what I mentioned earlier, that to some extent, with each of the Ultimates, they're affected by the death of Tony Stark in some way. To where in this case, for Hank, with Tony dying, he's looking at Janet like, hey, that could have been her. In fact, it was almost her. Which is why he also goes on to say that he thought bringing the two of them here would be a good thing so that they could mourn together, because he knew they needed something like this after all they've been through. And when he tells her for a moment, he's like, I don't know, that was stupid. Only for her to tell him it was genius and give him a kiss on the forehead. And I gotta admit that I really like the dynamic between these two, because I can't recall seeing a young Hank Pym and Janet in a relationship where he was the more affectionate one, as opposed to being a straight up jerk. And I think that in itself just really switches the dynamic in a very interesting way. But I can't help but to think that at some point, either he's gonna die or Janet's gonna start beating him. But before we leave the memorial service, I do also want to point out that it's being sponsored by Oscorp, which just ties things back to Harry and Gwen and what we've seen going on with them in the Ultimate Spider-Man series. And just after this, next we follow up with Hawkeye, who at this point has more or less gone back to what we saw when the character was first introduced, when they were attacking all these different Roxxon facilities, but this time around they've made their way to Oscorp Defense, which was formerly known as Stain Stark Defense, because for Hawkeye, after everything that's happened since they've joined the Ultimates, they no longer look at Roxxon as the one company who's done their people wrong, but instead on a much larger scale. Hawkeye's no longer looking at whose fight this actually is, because now they just see it all as one great big fight. So in the here and now, when we find them destroying a bunch of different weapons that are supposed to be for the upper and lower kingdoms as a part of the secret war that's going on, Hawkeye's just like whatever, and destroys all of it. And just after this, next we head over to a protest in Guatemala, where we quickly find these protesters getting battered and tased with all sorts of excessive force being applied, until suddenly America Chavez shows up to save these people by making the officers' armor melt and then freeze, trapping them inside. And she makes sure to let these guys know that she didn't kill these officers, and in fact they'll be fine because someone will show up soon to cut them out. And after saving these people, they ask her name, so she tells them America, but then after that someone asks where she came from, only for her to tell them, I don't know. Every time I try to think about the past, I end up thinking about the future, which for us just brings back the whole idea of we still have yet to see the whole backstory of how America got here and how she was captured. But after saving these people, she went on to tell them about a better world that could exist and how it's everyone's responsibility to make it happen. And she even goes on to say that there's a name for people who believe like her, and they're called the Ultimates. And so in a way, it's almost like she's helping the team to be seen in a more positive light. But while she's here, she hears sirens coming. So she makes sure to send everyone back home safely so that they're not all right back in danger when authorities arrive. And just after America, next we head over to Thor and Sif, where we find them now making their way to Yggdrasil with the intention of taking the fight to Allfather Loki. And prior to this, Sif had told Doom that this was something that her and Thor just needed to do, because her and Thor had spent too much time just focusing on Earth when all the 9 realms need them. So going forward for Sif and Thor, this is the start of the Asgard Rebellion. So it's like they'll be back, but they've got their work cut out for them going against Allfather Loki. And after this, the next thing we do is head over to the Triskelion satellite, where She-Hulk is demanding that Doom sends her back to her island, only for him to tell her time and time again that he can't. And it makes a lot of sense why he's telling her no here, because if he sends her back to her island, not only is Bruce gonna kill her, but many others are gonna die as well. And Doom tells her, they will take you immediately. Banner and his men, they will torture you until you break. They have instruments and techniques at their disposal that will allow them to play through your memories like videotape, cameras sensitive enough to take pictures of your thoughts. which, as we know from Ultimates issue 4, Doom has experienced this firsthand. So it's not even a matter of him saying what might happen, but in the case of She-Hulk, if she were to go back and get taken by Bruce, he would go on to learn everything that she knows about the Ultimates, as well as the location of their base, allowing them to just show up at any time and kill everyone, wiping out the Ultimates and their goal of fixing the world. And Doom goes on to tell her, you being here is the only thing that keeps your people safe. It is the power Banner has over you, his only leverage, which then has LaJory opening up and telling Doom how she needs her people, because really her whole life is on that island. But then Doom goes on to say, I'm out of practice with people. I think, actually, I was never very good with them. The Ultimates was his idea, which Doom says as She-Hulk is looking inside of this huge tank. And mind you, while they're having this talk, it's happening at the same time as the Stark Tower Memorial, so there's a bit of overlap with Father Murdoch's sermon as well. But right here, to kind of help LaJory out, Doom tells her that he can tap into the Hulk's surveillance system so she can at least see her people back home and know that they're safe, since she can't actually be there. And she's grateful for that, but he goes on to tell her, we must keep going. We owe it to him, we owe it to them all. As LaJory heads back over to the tank and we see that it's Tony inside. And also at this time on the TV, we got Father Murdoch's sermon, kind of overlap with what we saw earlier, right back into this moment with him saying, now we know this. Destruction comes with an ideology, a movement of hate, but in the face of hate, what else can we do but fully commit ourselves to the cause of love and forgiveness and pray for them, as we get a better look at Tony's body. And it looks like Doom's got something cooking here, and who knows what that might be. Tony 2.0, Kang the Conqueror, it's anybody's guess. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here, who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below where you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.